it turns out mom does not love all of her children equally. And what I mean by that is not all of us got tickets to the Eras tour. No, I'm just kidding. It's really not Taylor's fault that Ticketmaster sucks. So while everyone is planning their concert outfits and making those cute little friendship bracelets, I decided to make a TBR because a TBR is kind of like a set list, right? These are all of the books that I'm going to be reading while I'm sitting at home watching concert videos of everybody else. I actually think this is gonna be a lot of fun. I've organized this list into each of the albums. So we're gonna start with Midnight's book recs and work our way back to debut. We're gonna start with a book about two people who have most definitely fallen into the lavender haze, and that is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. The reviews for this book are actually insane. Reading this book felt like an out-of-body experience, and I fear I'll never recover from it. Reading this masterpiece is not enough. I want it engraved on my tombstone, tattooed on my body, injected into my veins. Cried, sobbed, threw up, cut off all my hair, threw myself down the stairs, crashed my car into a grocery store, drank bleach straight from the bottle, lit a cigarette next to my dad's oxygen tank, and entered the lion's den. This is the best written book I've ever come across. It's about a doctoral student and a counterfeit artist. They meet one day, perchance, in an art institute, and they fall in love, but the story is about more than just like their romance. It's also about both of their mental health issues, and apparently it's some sort of like philosophical take on time travel or quantum physics. I don't really know. This book is kind of obscured in mystery, and I think that's how the author wants it to be, so I'm just gonna try to go into it not knowing very much, other than apparently it's gonna make me want to throw up. And then my other book rec for Midnights is called Amelia Unabridged by Ashley Schumacher. So when I think about the Midnights album as a whole, I feel like it's very much coming from a place of somebody who is looking back on their life and maybe considering some of their mistakes and their regrets and things that they just wish had happened differently. And this book seems exactly that vibe. It sounds so sad. It's about these two best friends who are both obsessed with this one particular book series. And so they end up going to like some sort of writers festival where they get the opportunity to meet this author. But it turns out that only one of them can meet him. And so she goes to meet him, and then the two of the best friends get into a huge argument about it. The other girl is really upset, and then they go their separate ways. She gets into her car, and then the friend dies in a car crash, like right after this argument. And so our main character just has all of these unresolved feelings of like this huge friendship that she's just lost, and they were like super mad at each other at the time, and it's all tied up in like this novel that they were both really obsessed with. And then she ends up meeting the author again, and apparently he turns into a love interest, and like oh, the drama, the pain. Moving right along to Evermore. I'm so proud of myself for this one. Our first book rec is literally called Long Story Short by Serena Kaler, and I don't know if she's a Swiftie and she totally planned that, or if it was just happenstance. Personally, I'm inclined to believe the former, but I don't know, and I don't care. It's just so perfect for this album. It's about our main character who is like a statistical genius, and she has been homeschooled her entire life. So she's 18, she gets into the college of her dreams, but her parents are a little bit nervous about letting her go like off on her own for the first time. So they agree to let her go to this school, but she first has to kind of prove to them that she can handle things on her own by going and attending this like Shakespeare theater camp over the summer. And so it's really funny because like she's super into math and calculus and engineering, but then it's all of these like dramatic theater geeks that she has to like become friends with somehow, and it's very like found family vibes, and it sounds really sweet. Next up, I wanted to include a book that had both cozy vibes but also involved murder, because that's basically how I would describe Evermore if I had to like tell somebody about it for the first time. And that is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. This is a new release by the author of Dial A for Aunties, which I've heard is a very good cozy mystery series, so I have high hopes for this one. It's about this older woman who lives in Chinatown in San Francisco, and she has this adorable little tea shop. She's maybe a little bit curmudgeonly, she kind of keeps to herself until one day a dead body just like randomly appears in her shop, like like somebody committed murder and then just dumped the body in her shop. And so she kind of becomes this like amateur detective, and she starts trying to figure out like who this guy was and if he's gonna come back. And somewhere along the way, she ends up getting to know a lot of her customers, because at first she suspects them, but then they become friends. And so it's like she's coming out of her shell and she's making connections with people and she's solving a murder. It just sounds so cozy. Now for the folklore books. First up, I have a book that is giving me strong Last Great American Dynasty vibes, and it is literally inspired by Moulin Rouge. It is a fantasy version of Prohibition era New York. Like, that is honestly just the best blurb ever. It's called Revel by Lissa Mia Smith, and our main character's family owns this like magical club that's kind of like a magical speakeasy, and they're struggling to make ends meet. So when this guy shows up in their club who's running for mayor, and he kind of like has this proposition for our main character where he's going to pay her if she pretends to like be his wife so that he can be elected mayor. And so she gets drawn into this world of like magic and intrigue as the election is going on, and apparently there's a mystery, and it just sounds like very Art Deco 1920s vibes, which is what I think of when I think of the Last Great American Dynasty. And then we also have These Broken Stars by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. So we all know how much Taylor Swift draws on like historical figures for inspiration. Like, she's obsessed with Elizabeth Taylor and with Daphne du Maurier and people like that. And this book just fits those vibes so perfectly, because it's basically described as being the Titanic, but in space. It is about these two people who are the only ones to survive the crash landing of their big like spaceship, and so they end up in completely like uncharted terrain, wilderness. They don't know what's going on. I don't think they really like each other at first, but then in order to survive and get out of their situation, they end up having to rely on each other and get to know each other. And then they're like, do we even want to leave because we love each other and we just want to stay here forever? And I've heard that like people who read sci-fi, like this is a really important, like really well-loved sci-fi romance series, so I'm really excited. Next up we have Lover, and I was really tempted to go back and reread the Summer I Turned Pretty series because it's just so lover coded to me, but I'm gonna try and wait a little while longer. I want to see when season 2 of the TV show is announced and hopefully try to hold out until a little bit closer to time. But this first book does give me those same sort of vibes. It's called Places We've Never Been by Casey West, and this will be my first Casey West book, so I'm really excited to see what I think of her writing style. But the love interest in this book is giving me strong Conrad Fisher vibes. It's basically about these two people who grew up, they were best friends together, and then I think the girl moved away, and so at first they were kind of keeping in touch, but they don't really talk much anymore. And so their families are going on this big epic like summer road trip together in an RV, and so they're gonna get to meet up together for the first time in years. She's so excited, but when they get there, it turns out he just acts like he couldn't care less and he doesn't want to be there, and she's just like really hurt by that. But of course, you know, we find out that there's more going on with him, and they end up like reacquainting themselves with each other, and it turns into a sweet, beautiful romance. My other recommendation for Lover, actually have the book, I just haven't read it yet, and that is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon. This has been described as You've Got Mail, but with zombies. So our main character is named Mercy, and Mercy's family basically owns this like magical funeral parlor where her job is preparing the souls of people who have died so that they don't turn into zombies. And then our guy, Hart, is a marshal, and so his job is to basically protect the town from people who have turned into zombies. And so in real life, they cannot stand each other. That is until they start writing anonymous love letters to each other. It says, after yet another run-in with Mercy, Hart finds himself penning a letter addressed simply to a friend. But much to his surprise, he receives an anonymous letter in return, and a tentative friendship is born. Little does Hart know, he's bearing his soul to the person who infuriates him the most. I love this trope. I know there are some people who think it's a little cheesy, and I get that, but You've Got Mail, and then my favorite book from last year, Letters to the Lost, also has this trope. So I'm really excited to see kind of like a fantasy take on it. Next up we have Reputation. Reputation is one of my all-time favorite albums. 1989, Reputation, and Fearless. That's like the trio for me. So with Reputation, we have breaking out of the mold. We have the vibes of like finding your power, figuring out who your real friends are. So for this one, I'm finally going to read the Shatter Me series by Theyre Watching You. I started the audiobook last night, and I will say it took me a little bit to get used to the writing style. It's very stream of conscious, so it's like Juliet will be talking and then she'll like say something in her head that she doesn't want to say out loud, and she'll like correct herself. And so that's sort of like repetitive and kind of like weird storytelling. It took me a little while to get used to, but once I did, I'm like fully in it now. The first hour of this book, let me tell you, this poor girl, she is imprisoned, she is all alone, she has just been told that she is nothing, that she's worthless, that she's a danger to society. It's so Reputation vibes, and I cannot wait to see this girl finally realize what she's made of and what she's worth. And I know so many people love this series to absolute pieces, so I'm really excited to like be in the group now. And then the other book for Reputation is called This Vicious Grace by Emily Thied. So it's set on this magical island kind of based on Italy, so it's very like Mediterranean Sea vibes, and our main character has really strong magical abilities, but her role in society is to get married and then amplify her husband's magic, because their island is under attack by this like crazy magical army and people are really scared. So they really need her to like get married so that her husband can basically save the day. Only the problem is she's already been married 3 times, and each time her husband ends up dying. The people have turned on her. They think she's gonna be the destruction of their society, and she has to go on the run. And so it ends up being that she has to hire this bodyguard to like protect her and get her out of there. And it's like a bodyguard romance, which is definitely one of my favorite tropes. And it's gonna be a series, and the sequel's coming out this year, so I really wanna read this book in time for the second book to come out. Next up we have 1989. For that, I want to reread the Inheritance Game series. It is so fun, so exciting. The characters are so like near and dear to my heart, especially Xander Hawthorne, the youngest. He is my favorite character. He's one of my favorite fictional characters, period. But when it comes to 1989, there is no one who is more blank space coded than Jameson Hawthorne. Like, I can make the bad guys good for a weekend. Are you kidding me? So yeah, 1989 vibes for sure. And then there's also a new book that I want to read called Theyre Watching You by Chelsea Ichaso. Again, power, wealth, prestige. We're set at a very elite boarding school, and our main character's roommate has been missing for 2 weeks. And basically, everyone has decided that she probably ran away, but our main character, she is not convinced, because apparently she had some sort of really big secret to tell her right before she disappeared. So as she's kind of snooping through her roommate's things to try and find a clue about where she went, she discovers an invitation to this thing called the Game Masters Society. So our main character ends up taking her roommate's place in this huge like initiation competition to get into this secret society, and along the way she's like making friends with all the super popular rich people at school, and she's trying to find out the mystery of what happened to her roommate. Next up we have Red, and I have done it again. I have found yet another book that fits a Taylor Swift song title, so I had to put it for this album, and that is Begin Again by Emma Lord. I read her last book that came out called When You Get the Chance, and it's like a Mamma Mia retelling set in New York City, and it's all about like Broadway. It's really good. So this one I have extremely high expectations for. It's basically about our main character's first year at school, and she's incredibly ambitious, she's incredibly determined, and she's like, nothing's gonna get in my way, like I have my goals, like that kind of vibe. And then she meets her cute green-eyed RA, and all of those plans go out the window. And then for my second recommendation, I mean, there's no denying it, Red is a very sad album. So of course I had to pick a book to just rip my heart into. So I chose If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan. I am equal parts excited and terrified to read this book. It's basically a friends to lovers situation. So we have childhood besties who grew up and grew apart, but one summer they get a second chance to possibly be together and they start falling in love, but then something really, really terrible happens and it just, I'm putting it on the list. I don't know. I just don't know. I've been wanting to read it, but I'm scared. Next we have Speak Now. This album holds such a special place in my heart because it's just one of those albums. I mean, I feel like every Taylor Swift album kind of just has the ability to transport me to the time in my life when it first came out, when I was listening to it. But this one especially, I put on any of these songs, like Sparks Fly, Speak Now, Enchanted, and I am just immediately transported. I'm a little girl in the backseat of my parents' car, staring out the window and just imagining all of these like crazy music videos in my head, and I'm just being incredibly emotional. This album has such strong fairy tale vibes, so I wanted to pick a book that was just an incredible sweeping fantasy to kind of go along with that. So I have chosen All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. It says it's set in a kingdom where danger lurks beneath the sea. Mermaids seek vengeance with song, and magic is a choice. The main character is a princess. So basically, in order to prove that she's like a legitimate heir to the throne, she has to give a magical demonstration. But it goes really, really badly. And so she has to go on the run. And she ends up striking a deal with a pirate to like take her around the kingdom and help her get her throne back. I think this is gonna be one of those books that just legitimately feels like you're being sucked into a fairy tale, and I'm so excited about it. My other recommendation for Speak Now kind of feels like a real life fairy tale. It's called Once Upon a K-Prom by Kat Cho. This book is basically my dream. It's about a girl who grew up with a guy best friend, and he ends up moving away to Korea and becomes like this huge K-pop star. But they made a promise to each other when they were little that they were going to go to their prom together, and so he ends up coming back to take her to prom, and I'm just like, so for Fearless, I had to do just classic fluffy teen romance vibes. So for that, I'm going to be reading Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. Literally everyone raves about this book, so I'm just finally gonna read it. Apparently, there's lots of Taylor Swift references, and the main character is like a huge Swiftie and a hopeless romantic, and she's trying to get her life to work out like a rom-com. I've seen pictures of the chapter headings in this book, and each one has a quote from a famous rom-com. Honestly, just that alone, I think is enough to get me to want to read this book. Obviously, all of the songs on this album are amazing, but the lyrics to 15, they just really hit your heart in a very, very tender place. So for that song specifically, I wanted to recommend Once Upon a Quinceanera by Monica Gomez Hira. I have never read a book like this. So basically, our main character is one of those like party princesses that like dresses up as Rapunzel or Ariel or whatever. And it's not really like her favorite job in the world, but she's getting through until the company hires her ex-boyfriend to play the part of like the prince that she has to like dance with at every party and interact with and pretend she's in love with while she's at work. We've reached the last album, the one that started it all, Taylor Swift's debut. For my first recommendation, I wanted to talk about Beth and Amy by Virginia Contra. If you are a fan of Little Women, you have to read this series. It's kind of a duology actually. So the first book, Meg and Jo, is like the name suggests, it's about Meg and Jo. All of the sisters are in it, but it focuses more on their story. So I've read that book already. It was amazing. I was really scared to read like a Little Women retelling. It's like a modernized retelling. It's not like, you know, they tried to rewrite Little Women, but I was still a little bit skeptical. It was amazing. So I'm really excited to read the sequel, which is about Beth and Amy. And particularly, I would say that if I had to assign an album to Beth's character, because of course that's what I love to do in my free time, is assign Taylor Swift albums to fictional characters, I would say her album is Debut. She's like just so sweet and innocent, and she didn't get to live past like 14 or 15 version, she gets a happier ending. She gets to explore a possible career as a musician, like as a singer-songwriter. So she goes to Nashville to pursue her dreams. Meanwhile, we're also following Amy, who of course is starting a relationship with Lori. Only in this story, they changed his name, and I don't know why. For some reason, they called him Trey. That's the only part about this series that really irritated me. Otherwise, it's amazing. And the very last recommendation, honestly, the tie for this book and this album is just the Southern vibes, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I really just need a reason to finally read this series. I literally ordered the book, like I have it in my possession, and I just needed a good excuse to read it. Okay, that is my super long TBR that is hopefully going to keep me distracted from the fact that I will never get to see the Era's concert in person. I'm still holding out for a concert movie. I'm sure she's gonna take care of all of us at home, you know. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know down below if there's any way I can be encouraging you or praying for you this week. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye!